haven't had a problem with it, and I really have used it.
Good, I'm glad.
So I know what she's saying, but it's, I never thought that it's not hot enough.
It is a really pretty line of fabric.
It's still blinking when I use it. And that I didn't see too many people.
Does it recommend regular or this? Ionized water?
No.
You're live.
Am I live?
Yes.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Susan.
How's it going?
Hi.
Good. So today we're going to be doing miniature woven stars. And here's the sample that we're going to be doing. And this pattern actually originally was in Christmas quilts and crafts that we did maybe 20 years ago. And I did this in 9-inch blocks. So now I've converted them down so they're in like, I think it's 1 inch and 3/4 inch blocks finished. But I'm sure we can do it with our new ruler. So this is the traditional one. Those of you in class, this is the kit you're going to have. But I should put this on the board. Hopefully it'll stay. There you go. As a lot of you know, I've been dabbling in the more modern colors. And this was actually colors that were on my French Bulldog's leash. And I thought they were really cute together. So there's her little quilt. It's called Jessie.
Is that the name of the dog?
Yep. Okay, and for those of you that are brave enough, you can go smaller and you can go down to here. Yeah, and all the difference is instead of squaring up to 1 1/4 inches, we'd square it to 1 inch, and it'll cause it to be that much smaller. So you can go there today if you want to. All right? So there's 4 colors to the quilt. As you can see, there's the center that creates the star. Okay, we have some background, and then we have 2 colors that make up our ribbons. Now, the most important thing to remember to keep your block straight is you need to identify what number is what color. So in today's example that I'm going to be sewing with you, color 1 is going to be my background. Color 2 is going to be my green ribbon. Color 3 will be my red ribbon. And then my star is color 4. Okay, and the picture that you have on your little piece of handout actually indicates those same colors. Now, if you were to go back and do this in different colors, I highly recommend that you would take a little piece of fabric, a piece of selvage, and just tape a little swatch next to each one of those. Okay, it's really going to make it easier for you. Before we get too far ahead and I start the technique, though, I was lucky enough this week to be given an antique quilt. And it's kind of wonky, but if one of you could go up there on this quilt, it's all done with piece triangle squares, just like what we're doing today. And those are 1-inch finished piece triangle squares. So I really like numbers and things like that, so I want to know how many pinwheels there were. So in this quilt, there's 2,622 pinwheels, which means the quilt maker had to make 10,486 piece triangle squares. And if you get really close up to it, you can see that it's all hand stitched. So she really started with little triangles. So that's over 20,000 little piece triangles. Isn't that amazing?
And no label.
There's no label. Yeah, a lady named Joanne up at the retreat I was just at gave it to me. And I did put a new binding on it. It was wonky before, and it's still wonky now, but it freshened it up a little bit.
Good color, though, for the binding.
Yeah, so if you really get into making these piece triangle squares, you could make that quilt. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out my fabrics. And what I want to do, I want to keep my lightest ones on top. So that means I'm going to put the colors 1 and 4 on top. So on the bottom, I'm going to put my 2 green squares. And then for my color number 3, which is my red, I'll put those. And I'm going to put those all right sides up. Okay, so you're going to lay them all out. And then I need to take one of my backgrounds and I'm going to put it on top of one of my green ones. And I'm going to put the other one on top of the red one. So basically you're mixing. It's like shuffling the deck. You're mixing them all up. And that leaves me with color number 4. And I'm going to put color number 4 on green and color number 4 on red. Okay? So, and those are all Same size square, so it'll be easy enough. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw grid work that we can use to do our sewing for our piece triangle squares. And I'm going to start, I'm just going to do my example on my combination of number 1 and number 2, okay? And the rest I'm going to set aside. So it's really easy to do your grid. I like to use my mat as a guide, and then I like to reinforce that measurement with my ruler. So I know that I need to draw my horizontal and vertical lines at 1 3/4 inches apart. And this is actually a 5 1/4 inch square. So I just take my ruler and I'll just place it here. So I have 1, and I'm going to go to 1 3/4. And don't cut it yet, like I was just thinking about doing. You really want to draw your line, okay? And I better use the thick so you can see it well. Okay, so I draw a thick line. You probably wouldn't want a line quite this thick, but this is just so you can see it. Then I'm going to go over another 1 3/4 and draw another. Okay, so I got my verticals, and now I'm going to go back and do my horizontal. And this is going to give me 9 squares. Okay, so that looks pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do, and actually if you have your pattern in front of you, I did an illustration for each one of these just so you can really follow along, because there's an easier way or a hard way to draw this grid, and this seems to be the easiest. Basically, I want to put 1 diagonal line in each one of these squares. So I found that if I just drew 1 long diagonal from corner to corner, okay, it's going to go like that. If it gets a little bit off, it's not to matter. We're going to be squaring these patches up. And I kind of wanted to show you that. I mean, I sort of did that on purpose, just so you wouldn't get all stressed. Okay? And then I'm going to draw a rectangle. So I'm going to draw on the outside corner. Okay, like that. Okay, so, and then to complete it, I'll just draw here and here. So can you all see this rectangle? Okay. So now we're ready to go sew. And what I'm going to do is I really want to make sure that I have a scant 1/4 inch. I want to make sure I have plenty of fabric to square up, okay? So that means I put my width on 4.0, which means I'm just slightly closer to the 1/4 inch foot with the needle. When I start to sew, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this long line, because it's going to help secure the 2 fabrics together, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down one side and then go back 1/4 inch down the other side. Now if you go ahead and mark all 4 sets at once, you can just assembly line sew these, just one right after another. Okay, so we're off. Make sure that you have thread in your bobbin. I was doing some sewing and watching the Hallmark Channel this weekend, and I was sewing quite along with no thread in my bobbin. It was a good show. You know, my husband always says he's not going to watch those sappy shows, but I catch him over on the couch going like this at the end. He likes them. Do you watch him, Orion?
Yeah.
Well, he probably doesn't have time to watch them in his household.
I watch the
I have not seen it. I hope.
You know, I saw Frozen not too long ago, and I just was floored how good it was. Okay, so I sewed 1/4 inch from both sides, which means I should have parallel seams that are 1/2 inch apart. Okay. Now, if you get started and you accidentally find that you sewed on the line, you don't have to really worry about taking those stitches out, because when you cut it, you're just going to cut right through those stitches. But make sure you end up with that. The next thing I want to do is I want to sew the inside of this rectangle, and then I'll go back and I'll sew the outside of the rectangle. After having made many of these, I figured out that was the best thing to do. You try all sorts of options, right? Okay, and then once I get to one of these lines, these vertical or horizontal lines, I want to leave my needle down, and I am just going to lift my foot and pivot and then just continue down, keeping the edge of my 1/4 inch foot right on that drawn line. And if you go over a stitch, don't stress about it. Okay, I'm going to pivot again. I find you're a lot more relaxed at quilting if you don't stress, right? It's a quilt. Yes, it is a fun activity. You need to remind yourself, I am having fun. Okay, so I got to the end. Now this time I need to take my needle out and lift my presser foot. And I'm just going to turn around. Now I'm going to go around the outside, which means essentially I went around clockwise and now I'm going to go around counterclockwise. Okay. And if you have an automatic pivot on your machine where every time you stop it goes up, it makes it easier as well. Not all machines have that, but if you have it, you can use it. Okay, turn around. And sometimes when you're going around the outside your edge, you'll find that it'll gather a little bit, but once we cut our patches apart, it'll just release that thread. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's all it is to it of your sewing. And see, doing it this way, we actually made 18 piece triangle squares at a time. And it goes a lot faster than doing it individually. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my patch apart. And the first thing I want to do is cut it on the vertical and horizontal lines, those straight lines going across. Because once you cut the diagonal, sometimes it's hard to line up the other ones as easy. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And if you can keep it kind of together on your mat, that's great. I just go back. See how it's like puckered there? So I'm just going to release it right now when I cut. If you have a really thick line like mine, just try and cut down the middle of that thick line. Okay. And then I'm going to start on my diagonal, so I'm going to cut the big long one first. And then I'll just go over to the two sides. And you notice how I'm just lifting my ruler like this? And that's really helping me not kind of get my fabrics moving around. I don't want to move my fabrics. It's a little ruler technique you can try out today. Okay. And there you go. Okay, so when we have it done, look how nice that is. So you guys will be done in an hour or so. If you don't start chit-chatting too much, huh? Okay, so they're all apart. Now I want you to turn on your handout. This is probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. And it's your pressing. When we originally did this pattern, we didn't really pay attention to the pressing and the seams did not lock. Today they're all going to lock for you. Okay? So on these ones, this is my combination. I'm actually at the top of page 4. So this is my combination of 1 and 2. Can you all see that, the green in the background? And it says, which way am I supposed to press towards?
The white.
Towards the white. So I'm just going to take a couple. I want to go over on how to use the ruler for those of you who haven't seen it. But then I'm going to show you how we're going to press the rest of them, how it's going to work for us, okay? So I love this new cordless iron. I love not having to worry about the cords. So we're just going to press it straight down, set the seams so they sink into our fabrics, and then just roll the background up and press. I just press right on into it. Now with these little patches, if you use steam, use it very wisely because it's pretty easy to catch on it and kind of distort it, okay? I don't know why there's a fly in here. He came in a couple of days ago and has not departed yet. Okay? All right. So here's our patch. And now I'm going to take the new 4.5, I still call it new even though it's a couple months old, new 4.5 inch triangle square up ruler. And if you can see, I'll put it on this kind of background so we can see the lines first. You can see how one side has all these little tick marks. Well, the green little tick marks, those mean 1/8 of an inch. And the red tick marks are 1/4 of an inch. And those are only on the ones that we see the whole numbers, the 1, 2, 3, or 4. if we turn it around, these are really common. What we usually square patches up to is 1.5, 2.5. So we really didn't need to have those tick marks. You know, we try to use the least amount of writing on the ruler as possible. Okay, so today our magic number is 1 1/4. And so the 1 1/4, if you look right on the ruler, this will be the 1 is the thick line, and the red is going to be the 1/4. Okay, that's another reason I wanted to show you on this particular patch so you can see the red line. Okay, so I'm just going to square up 1. Okay, so that gets rid of that. And then I'm just going to lift my ruler and only turn my patch. So now when I place it back on there, I'm going to have those red lines back at that seam line. And another thing that you can make sure that you get a really nicely squared patch is this diagonal line. It should be going through this corner right there. This fly is driving me crazy. I'm about ready to rotary cut him.
Good luck with that one.
I was up in Montana, and we have really those big wood ants. They're like 1/2-inch ants. And I was rotary cutting, and also I looked down, I had rotary cutted 1 1/2. So anyway, so there you go. Yeah, I know. So there it goes. Then you're going to square them all up to the same size. Okay, so that's the little lesson on squaring up. Now it's time to lay out the block. And we always want to start, this is starting at the bottom of page 4. We're going to start with our center. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find my 2 patches that will be just like the ones we just squared out, and I'm going to put them in 2 opposite corners. Okay? So if you turn over to page 5, you can see that. And then the next one, I'm going to introduce the second ribbon color with the background, and that's color 3 in 1. Okay, so it sort of looks like a kind of a cute shoe fly right now, right? Now we're going to do the stars. That's why that fly's here, because I'm doing the shoe fly.
Part of your demo.
It's part of my demo. Thanks for coming, fly. Okay, so you can see how those are the same, just mirror image of each other. And we'll do this one as well, the 2 sides with the red. Oops, that's not right. It should be the opposite. You should have these seams right here going like parallel. Okay, so does that look like our star? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're going to sew it together. And, a little what? Oh, I do. When I go to sew this, we're going to sew them in 2 different ways. If we look at the overall quilt, you can see that there's actually 9 blocks that we have here. Okay? So I want to sew and press my seams on the 2 or the 4 corners in the inside center. Those seams are going to be pressed one way, and then these ones right here, I'm going to press the seams the other way. That way when I go to sew block to block, they're going to match up. Okay? So just keep that in mind. I'm going to address that again in a little bit, but I just wanted to let you know, just don't start sewing all 9 at once. Okay? All right. So when I go to sew it, it's just the basic thing. I'm just going to flip the center row over the right. And I did not trim back my seams on this. You know, sometimes I trim them back to 1/8 of an inch. I tried it on some of them, and it didn't help matters. With anything, it was harder for me to lock them up. Yeah, so just leave them as is. Okay, and this is when you really hope it's going to just go like it should, right? Yeah, sorry. We should always have our lids closed. It looks much better. Okay, and I'm just going to assembly line sew those one right after the other. And make sure they're good and lined up. I don't pin at this point, but I am going to pin when I get to the next one, sewing the rows together. Okay. All right. So these are all sewn. Now I find it much easier, especially when you have really little pieces like this, to cut these patches apart. If you start trying just to add the next one right on, to me it gets really tangled. But if you're comfortable with leaving the attached threads there, that's fine as well. Okay, so I'm just going to open this up if I can. Okay, so when you open this, can you see you have like the 1/4 inch here and the 1/4 inch there? It's going to look like it's way off, but that's just because of the size proportions of it. Okay, so then I'm going to take my final one and I'm going to put that right sides together. And now, since we have pressed those seams the way I explained to you in that other step, these are all going to lock for you. It didn't do that before. It didn't do that 20 years ago, but today we'll take it, right?
I believe you.
I know. It just says press seams in one direction or something. But it's the way we used to do things. We've come a long way. I was looking through that Christmas Quilts and Crafts book, and you should see both my hair and Orion's hair in that book. So when your hair was still long, and my hair was very curly. It was just hilarious. Okay, if you have a stiletto, it would be good to have. Okay, and open it up. Okay, now we're going to add this. And can you see how these seams all lock together because of that pressing? It really makes a difference. Because you remember, if we're off a little bit on these little ones, it's big.
It's a lot.
Yeah, you see it a lot more than you do on a full-size block. Okay. Now, this is the first blocks I'm going to make. I'm going to make 5 of them. And when I do that, I am going to press my seams towards my corners and also towards the center. So when I go to sew these seams together, they'll lock again. So I'm going to take these over to the pressing mat. So these are going to go out and the middle one's going to go in. Out and out. The only thing you have to get used to with this iron is you can't go like this.
I know, I did that a couple of times.
But I like it.
And it stays hot.
And look at that, I just sewed that wrong. Do you want to see what I did? Okay, can you see that's upside down?
Yep.
Isn't that clever?
Reinventing the pattern.
I'm reinventing the pattern. So this is an opportunity that I have to show you how to use the seam ripper. And this is actually a pretty good lesson. Okay, so I'm going to take out this last seam right here. Now, especially on little ones, and especially if you're on bias, I don't like to take this and pull it and go like that. I don't think that's, see, this is a good lesson. I'm glad I did this. I like to go from the back and remove about every 3rd or 4th stitch on one side. Okay? It makes it a
I
lot.
have a temptation to do it the way you said, and pull on them,
Yeah.
and then it distorts the block.
When I first started teaching here, you know, the big thing, and Eleanor's really good at using the rotary cutter, and just, so I thought, oh, I'm going to do that. Oh my gosh, I cut through the student's quilt, and it was like fabric that we didn't have. So anyway, I don't do that anymore. Anyway, can you see how that just releases? No pressure on the fabric at all. So that was a great little lesson, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. You did it on purpose, didn't you?
Yeah, I wish I could say that. But I think that fly took me seriously because it went away. Okay, so let's look back at our quilt. I think that's the way it should go. So we'll re-sew that. It's always good to have a mistake here and there, right? Just make sure we don't get too confident, right? Keeps us humble. It is Christmas after all, right? Now, if I do it wrong again, then I'd be real embarrassed. I think that looks much better, don't you?
That's it.
Okay, but you got a taking out lesson, so that was good. Okay. And then which ways these seams are going to go? Out, right?
Yep, towards the corner.
Okay. So here are my little patches. And this is where I'm going to pin. Okay, so I'm going to turn it because I'm going to be sewing from top to bottom. And I'm going to take this middle row and I'm going to put it right sides together, okay? And where I'm going to pin, and I actually did a really close-up picture for you. It's going to take 4 pins. Be sure they're sharp, okay? And I pin the end, and then where this seam locks together right here, I'm not going to pin on that seam. I'm going to pin right before the seam, making sure that I have the seam underneath in my pin. And I want to make sure that my fabrics are in place before I get to that intersection. So can you see how my pin, where it is? Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing with this right here. I want to make sure I pin it before I get to that seam. And then I'm going to pin the outside edge. You ever notice sometimes when we just pin the middle, when we get to the end, the outside gets a little off? It has a mind of its own. I don't know what it's thinking, but okay. So I did do a real close-up for that, just to kind of enforce that. And it's also real important that your pin doesn't extend beyond this edge right here, okay? Because you don't want to be hitting if you have a little flange on your 1/4 inch foot. And this is another good way of kind of help guiding your patch through, because you can kind of hold on to the pins as well. Especially when you get to the real little ones. Okay. I'm being really good and taking my pins out, just in case any sewing machine people are watching me, except I missed that one.
Did you sew over them if they weren't working?
Yep. I do, you know what I do? This is probably not a good lesson, but I sew them until I hit one and one goes flying, and then it scares me, and then it takes me out of that habit for a while.
I just did them.
So let's see how that matches?
Oh, yeah.
It gives you a real good match doing that. Okay, so then I'm just going to add the top one and pin in the same way. You kind of have to, when you start pinning, you have to think about, okay, how's it going to go in my machine so you have your pin on the right side of your, on the correct side of your seam.
So you don't pin so that you pull your seam, your pins from the right hand.
No. And I am right-handed.
I know, I'm just curious, it's a little different
It's
than
the same way Teresa does it too.
Yeah. You pin them so they hang off the left side.
Yeah. I don't know if I was ever taught that or I just started doing that. Yeah, my mom's the one that taught me how to sew years and years ago. It'd make me sound really old if I told you how many years ago. Okay, so this is our final little seam. Okay, and we're just gonna cut the threads. And let's see how this match went. Okay, well, that's pretty good. Pretty good. Okay, so remember how the other ones we went towards the middle? So I'm going to have these go towards the middle as well. Or away from the middle, excuse me.
Away from the middle.
Away from the middle. Okay.
So you press them so that they match the other side.
Right, and I have some done that I'm going to show you just so you can see them compared next to each other, exactly how it's going to go. So you're going to make some that go like this. You can see how they're going to the corners. You're going to make 5 that look like this, and then you're going to make 4 that look like this. Can you see how they're all going in? That way when we go to sew them, block to block, you're going to get locks in there. And the better your locks, the better your matches are going to be. Okay? So that's just how you're going to construct 3 across and 3 down. But I did want to just go over a little bit. I did something a little bit different with the border. I couldn't decide what to do with my border to make it green or red. So I thought it'd be really fun to have a green border where the green ribbon goes out and a red border where the red goes out. So in order to, and I did that on, you can really see it on this bright one, okay? But in order to do that, I thought, okay, so I still have to make it look sort of balanced, right? I couldn't do the normal side, top, and bottom. So I decided to do partial seaming. So those of you that have not seen it, I thought I'd just do a little partial seaming for you, just to remind you, refresh your memory how that all works. And I decided just to use a basic beige background, just so we can concentrate on the border, because it gets kind of busy in there with all the seams and everything. So the first thing that you do, and it really doesn't matter if you start with color 2 or color 3, but you're just going to start with 1, and I am going to just put it down here, and I'm only going to sew halfway down, okay, and then we're going to stop. So I'm just going to flip this right sides together, start at this edge right up here, and stop about here. If you need to remind yourself, you know how sometimes you're sewing things, you need to leave an opening, you just sew that opening right close. So anyway, you can just put like a little mark where you're going to stop. Okay, so I'll do that. And again, I'm still using a scant 1/4 inch. I used a scant 1/4 inch throughout this entire quilt. Okay. And I put like a little lock at the end of that, just to make sure that it doesn't start pulling out while I'm doing the remaining of my sewing. And I would not take it to the iron here. I just take it and just like finger press it, or you can use like a wooden iron or something like that. Okay, so that's my color 2. So now with my color 3, I'm going to start it up here, and I'm actually going to sew all the way down to the end of the green. The reason that I mean, mathematically I could tell you what this size should be right now, but it kind of depends on your seam allowance. So I wanted to give you some freedom here. If it's not exactly the same, I did not want you to be short, you know. We're just going to cut off the extra after it's sewn. Okay, so I'm just going to do that. I'm going to put it into my machine. Okay, and since I'm sewing it this way, can you see how I don't have to worry about this green seam underneath there? It's already pressed out, so I'm not going to be fighting it or worrying about it. Okay, this one, just going to press it out. And eventually I'm just going to go back and cut off all these tails. Okay, the next one I'm going to do, so I had a green, then I sewed the red, turned it 90 degrees. I'm going to add another green. It's pretty easy once you kind of get it in your mind what you're doing. And I think this, like partial seaming it's called, I think it kind of adds a little bit of, you know, variety to your quilting sometimes. So it's not so expected. Okay, again, turn it 90 degrees. I know I kept going back and forth. What color? Green or red, green or red? And I said, well, shoot, I'm doing both colors. And if I actually had the little quilt top in here with all the seams, I would probably go ahead and pin these strips down to the quilt top, because you have lots of bumps and things going on in there. Okay, so look at that. We have this cute little thing that looks like this. All I'm going to do, that one we started with, I'm just going to flip that right sides together and complete that seam. That's all there is to it. That's not hard, huh? Okay, so I'll take it over to my iron, and although I finger pressed, now I'm going to go ahead and iron it all away from my center. That's the way it's going to want to go. I'm certainly not going to want to press back towards all those seams you got going on in there.
You know, that's a pretty iron, too.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? This iron, yeah. Well, it's like the old-fashioned irons that they used to heat on the stove, right? Yeah. Okay, so then I'll just go back. I like to put a line of my ruler on that seam line just to make sure I have a good 90 degrees going on, and I'll just cut off those little edges out there. Real easy. See, that wasn't hard at all, huh? So if you want to do your quilt really fast, you can just start with your square, put your borders on, and be done with it. All right? Took you guys a while, right? Okay, so there you go. That's it on partial seaming. And then we can just go ahead and add on your outside border. that I went back and did the 2 sides and then the top and bottom. And for quilting, I just did the quilting very simple. I just sewed around each one of the 9 stars, and then this was kind of popping up a lot, so I did sew just around these squares here. That's all there is to it. And then I just sewed in between the first and second border, and then just like an echo quilting, which you can probably see better in this colorway over here, the difference. And that's it.
And a binding.
And a binding. Alrighty? All right, well, thank you. Yay! All right. See, that was a good mistake to do.